what would you say are some of the key things that you've seen change in marketing? Like what worked, what doesn't work? And then I guess we can kind of go into each of those and dissect it further.
Yeah, I mean, so much has changed. That 30 years you mentioned, it ages me, but I have been at a time where things did change quite a bit. I mean, when I first came into the industry, I started in advertising, and everybody was talking about reach and frequency, and the media plan was key. And the idea was you came up with a story and you just put it out as massively as you possibly could. And the game was sort of tuning that in to try to reach the people at the right time. And really, the brands controlled the narrative. And everybody I can remember sort of coming up, they kept talking about, oh, it's going to change, and the consumer or the customer, the buyer is going to take over the narrative. It's going to be about, they're going to dictate everything. And for a while, everybody was really into that story. And I kind of kept waiting for it to happen. And then, of course, you had the internet revolution that took place. And then eventually the power did, in fact, shift to the customer. And they really started to dictate what needs to be said, as opposed to brands teaching people what they should think or how they should act. And so that's one of the biggest things, is just the dynamic of who controls the narrative has changed completely, 180-degree change, right?
So I guess my first question would be to go deeper on that. What would you say the main reason it has changed? Just there's more information available. Is that kind of the main variable?
Yeah, more information is available, right? Media proliferation, right? People can control more of how they consume content than they used to. I mean, we were in here talking about, because they have a nice display of VHSs behind you, and MASH is they have part of the series. And I was telling you about that story, and coming home from school, I mean, it was in syndication, and there weren't choices. I watched MASH because that was it, right? If I wanted sort of some downtime after school, that was what was on. But, options are so many now, and you can control it. I know with clients who do webinars, we talk a lot about the excitement of putting the content out, and everybody gets really excited to see who's going to attend the webinar. And I always tell them, it's really not about who attends live. It's about the after effect, because people want to consume the content when it's convenient for them. And so that's one of the primary things that's changed. Then, the ability to measure who is doing what when means that it's not about just mass distribution anymore. It's much more targeted, and you've got to then go after the people who you think have the highest ability to be interested in what you have to offer.
Yeah, and you mentioned webinars is interesting. I guess we can focus on marketing channels, right? So you mentioned radio, advertising, all these sorts of things. Is there, in the years you've been doing this, is there certain channels that you've seen, just blow up? Maybe you can mention social media platforms versus things that aren't really suggested as a fractional CMO to the client anymore.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everything, you would know this very well. Everything's gone digital in one way or another. I mean, old guys like me that think about television as a broadcast medium, I mean, that doesn't even happen anymore, right? Certainly it's over the airwaves, but really digitally is the way everything is consumed now. And that means, the television even is a much more targeted medium than it's ever been before. So everything has gone digital. That's, one of the things in terms of things that are working and things that have changed. I follow a lot of people. Gary Vee is one of them. You've probably heard of him. And, he's got a lot of interesting things to say, but one of the things he talks about is zigging when others are zagging to a degree. And so where, say, for example, Google AdWords right now is super competitive, very difficult to compete. It's gotten to be expensive. I've heard him talk about, depending on your audience and your strategy, hey, some of those alternative media options that maybe you're not thinking of anymore should be considered. Out of home, which is probably one of the lamest media options that people, can think of, but the competition isn't what it used to be. And so the uniqueness of the message, if it fits your strategy, you have to think about those now.
And so I guess, my thought would be, it's just, I want your input on this. If a lot of people are moving away from, let's say, radio advertising or other mediums that used to be popular, do you think there is an advantage to maybe looking into that because there's not a lot of competition, or is the main variable around the fact that there's just not as much attention there?
No, I think it is about the competition thing. And so delivering your medium, there used to be a saying that medium is the message, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the lack of competition means that for cost per message, right, is lower for you. And so again, if it fits your audience and their behavior patterns, it makes sense. It's not going to be as expensive as the thing everybody's trying to do. Yeah. Right now, if your audience isn't there, being there uniquely doesn't really matter, right? So it's not as simple as just go where no one else is. I mean, you have to pay attention to what your customer likes, which again is that dynamic. It's changed. It used to be that I could buy 100 share of outdoor boards and just blast the market I wanted to be in. And because there weren't other options, that message worked really well as a mass medium. Yeah. Now it's different.
I think another thing I'm interested in is the amount of the volume of ways you can reach, your per prospect now, where again, maybe before my time, but what I've heard at least is that there were a lot less marketing channels to consider when you're looking to advertise. Now it seems like there is a million things. There's, every platform has their own advertising you can do now, even on your Reddit or whatever the case may be. So how do you think that kind of affects the market, and what you tell CEOs is the now that there's so much volume in what you could do?
Yeah, so I think everything goes back to strategy. And strategy is also based in insights into who you're selling to, why you're selling them a certain thing. There's an economic logic for your business. That means who you're targeting is chosen and purposeful, not random. So those insights dictate the media that's chosen. And there are, of course, endless options. And so the other variables then become, how are you controlling your cost of acquisition? How are you reaching the person at the right time with the right message in a cycle that makes sense for how they want to buy from you, right? So it's about being more tailored to what that customer wants and reaching them with the right message at the right time.
Would you agree now? I mean, with that, consider that it's almost more important to have good strategists around you because there's just too many things to consider.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely think that. I mean, one of the biggest challenges people in my chair face, and I'll bet you get this,
Yeah.
is you get a lot of CEOs or leaders of businesses that want to get into marketing, and there can be this over rotation towards lean gen and really fast results. Of course, it can happen, right? Anybody can catch lightning in a bottle, and case studies are written, and everybody loves to point at them. But that's the smallest percentage of most businesses that have to take a much more test and learn approach, right, to finding the right mechanisms for reaching their audience than the people who struck it rich, so to speak, and got lucky. So the strategy piece is critical, and it's the piece everybody wants to overlook because you look to tactics quickly. But if you don't have the strategy set, it can still work, but you're going to fumble around in the dark reading your tactics longer than if you are purposeful.
And it makes me think, and I see this with a lot of the companies we work with, companies that just want to cut corners and just go right to investing in lead gen without thinking about branding, strategy, positioning, whatever. Well, they might get some short-term gain. It's almost 100% going to prevent them in the long term from succeeding. Would you kind of agree with that?
100%. It always tops out.
Yeah.
It just absolutely always tops out. And
Yeah.
so, a lot of the people that I work with are people that did that. They got started because they were startups and they had a great idea for a product. They knew it was unique, so the product was good. Maybe sales even reached some level of maturity where you've got able salespeople, and they've had a couple of tactics that work really well. And so everybody's off to the races, but it always hits a ceiling because you're effectively catching the low-hanging fruit, but you're not necessarily resonating in a way that's going to allow you to scale. And so that is where you've got to be much more purposeful.
Yeah, and I want to talk about investing in brand real quick, but it reminds me so much of, even for us, scaling our own cold outreach and advertising. The more we invest in brand, having good, creative, things we're doing here and stuff like that, the more it helps our business grow. So I've seen it firsthand. And to the CEOs you work with, how much of the conversation is really investing in brand and positioning, and how much dividend does that pay out into those conversations?
It varies, of course, because the good clients will spend the energy to really understand what their brand is supposed to mean, what it means to them and what it means to their team. I've often found that companies follow the leader, right? And so if the leader isn't invested in what the brand is supposed to mean, and if they don't embody those principles, the brand really doesn't mean that more often than not, because the team looks to the leader for what to emulate. And so smart companies will spend the energy picking a brand position that leadership team, and in particular, typically the CEO visionary, really feels is representative of what they want that brand to be. And there should be logic too about the space in the market that they can occupy that is unique, that gives them the ability to compete. But I often say to the clients I work with, okay, let's imagine this one-liner we're going to come up with, this elevator pitch that's grounded in your positioning and your messaging. You're at a party when someone says, what do? You're able to say it and you're not embarrassed by it, or you feel it reflects who you are.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you say it and you feel kind of gross, you'll never live it.
Yeah.
You'll
Yeah.
never display it.
Mm-hmm.
Your employees will never get behind it, and you'll, as a result, not execute it. And
Yeah.
so that work is pretty important.
Yeah. Would you say there's any examples of types of companies or industries where branding is less important or more important?
I think branding is always important. I can't think of an industry where it doesn't matter. I think where the problem comes in is in a lot of the engineering CEOs I work with, because that just seems to be what I end up doing. They don't really look at branding, and they always think of it in terms of my logo, or, you're just doing big ads. You're not doing anything that sells. And so, the engineering folks that I work with, they're very creative people, but they're always usually very metrics oriented. And so, they think of branding as fluffy and it doesn't really do anything. And so that's a real challenge as it pertains to branding. But I think branding is bigger than just your logo and just big messaging. It's, again, a position that's based in an insight about your audience that you can uniquely articulate, and that your entire company can deliver at every possible touch point. That accrues value. It's not necessarily just logos and ads, which I think more often than not is what a lot of people think.
And you had also mentioned engineering CEOs and stuff like that. So I guess for myself and for anyone listening, can you kind of explain the focus on that, or what that exactly means?
Yeah, I mean, so I've spent most of my career in tech, right? Or
Yeah.
working in technology companies. My sweet spot as a fractional is tech companies. But, the beauty of this business is you end up, it's sort of a bullseye, right? And the center might be that, but the rings around it, I've been lucky enough to work with manufacturing clients, education clients. But what I have found is the clients I typically work with, the CEOs, most of the time, they were engineers by training and maybe started doing some level of engineering. And then they rose either through, building a business or acquiring it, however they did it. They end up being my clients. And I've had someone point that out to me recently. He's trying to call me the engineering whisperer. And it's kind of funny, but I hadn't really thought of it. And if I look back, the companies I worked with, I was usually talking to an engineer about the marketing strategy. My clients have been the same.
That makes sense. And with these CEOs that you're working with, would you say there's any patterns of what success would look like in their branding and their marketing versus patterns of things that are not going to go well?
Yes. And one of them we've talked about. So that short-term thinking, that's a pattern for disaster. Again, if you're early on in your development, if you're a startup, you're not going to have the money to invest in a robust marketing program, right? And so your marketing is much more trial and error than anybody else's will be, right? And so some of that short-term focus is fine for a startup, because you have to do something to gain data to figure out, am I doing the right things? But if you're a bigger business, a mid-sized business, or even a larger enterprise business, I mean, you have more resources and more of ability to be purposeful in what you're doing, right? And so nevertheless, everybody is bottom line focused. And so one of the biggest problems is just being too focused on immediate results, because this marketing work, particularly the branding, the positioning, gathering the insights, it's tedious work, and it's work that people that are very metrics and outcome focused, particularly short-term focused, they just struggle with it because it doesn't have that immediate gratification. And we are nothing now if not an immediate gratification society. And so what makes the good side is the CEO and the leadership team that realizes, we have tried these things, we have failed at it, or it's just not been able to go past a certain point, and now they're willing to invest in some of that messy work, which a lot of times is about the people in that leadership team looking at each other and saying, wow, we really don't agree. And I didn't see that, and now what? And so that's messy and it's uncomfortable. But if it's not addressed, you're limited.
And I think I wanted to segue. It was going to be a later question, but
Yeah.
bring it up now. Startups or smaller brands versus larger brands. I think the range you typically work with is like 5 million to 100 million, right? Something along that. Would you say that there's a lot of different bits of advice you give to the 5 million or earlier in your career? Let's say when you probably worked with smaller brands, or the $100+ million brand.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest commonality is, to the extent that you can, and the startups can't always do this really well, know who you are trying to attract. Who is your customer? Know everything about them that you can possibly know, right? Then be very, very purposeful about what you intend to be. Now, if you're a startup, your intention and your ability to discern the signals from the market may not be that great. You probably have a fantastic product idea, more often, or a service idea. More often than not, that's where the visionary who makes the thing comes from. Particularly if they're an engineer, they know how to make the thing actually. So the product piece is usually really, really great, right? But you don't necessarily know about the market. So the startup has to be much more about the trial and error side of marketing that frankly all marketing has to have. But the startup's got to be willing to just do more things and pay really close attention to the feedback that they get, right? And be ready to pivot, perpetually be pivoting until you gather enough data that you can now make some informed choices. If you're a more mature business, you probably have a lot of data. It's probably all over the place. It's probably not been made a lot of sense of. And so you have, though, that foundation to work with. And so a lot of what I'll talk to those clients about is, let's gather this information you've already got. Let's interview your internal stakeholders and your customers, frankly, if we can. And let's vet what you think matters against what they're going to tell you matters. And you're in a position to actually gather enough data to let the data guide you more than the trial and error would. And so, but I always start from the perspective of, who is it we think we're selling to? What do we know about them? Why would they care about the thing we have to say? And that has to be where everything begins.
So to me, it seems a little bit more intuitive if you're a larger brand and you want to go out there and discover, what your branding is going to be, what your positioning. Let's say you have less resources, you're in like the 5 million range or even less. What are kind of the strategies you do to go about finding your brand and getting your strategy together?
Yeah, so it'll start with talking when interviewing with the leaders of the company, right? And typically, again, they're going to have a vision for the thing that they make, right? And that's great. You need to talk to them then about who it is that you want to be targeting. And then you need to be talking about their investment capability, because there is a limitation. This is a pay to play environment, right? And everybody will tell you that, you can create content and that will do it. And it will, right? But you have to create the content. And so a lot of times what I find with those startups, they're gung ho, they've got a lot to say, but because they're a startup, the people who can actually opine or expound upon what it is they make, why it's important, why it's unique, are very, very, very busy. Yep. And so what I talk to those startups about is, we need to choose the really cost-effective, low-cost, but sort of high-impact tools and media for your brand. Again, targeting it as much as possible is really, really critical, but you've got to invest in those first. But one of the most important things is, can you allocate the time to do this? Right. And then you have to match the tactics to what the company can actually do.
Would you say that the founder of the $5 million business versus the founder of the $100 million company, do you find that one is busier than the other, or just has less time to give towards putting into their branding and positioning and stuff like that?
Time, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I think that depends a little bit on the CEO. Mm-hmm. More often than not, those leaders, though, are busy no matter what. The startup guys, it's like you're turning the wrench and you're flying the plane. It's just, they have no time, right? But they're over-invested in the success of this thing. And so they do make time available. That busier sort of established business, more people pulling at you, different things, less wrench turning, but just more people wanting your time. And so they're equally time constrained. It really boils down to dedication to the process of building your brand, your position, your story, and how dedicated to that are you. If you are, you will make the time.
I guess, because I'm sure you've worked with companies beyond that $100 million range, or even when you worked at Google and things like that. What challenges do you think those sorts of companies face, let's say at the real enterprise level, like, beyond $1 billion versus, $50 million company, $100 million company?
Yeah, it's again, lots of time constraints, but it's just so many people and so much bureaucracy over how things get done. The challenge really becomes orchestrating the engine of a very large organization to carry a common story. That gets to be really, really tough, because you get a lot of constituencies, a lot of individual leaders that are rising in their influence, and they almost always want to put their thumbprint on something that they're doing. And that inherently comes through in some form of marketing and sales initiative. May or may not have anything to do with the direction the entire company is going. And so at that level, the challenge really becomes orchestration. And that's a lot about influencing people. That's a lot about selling internally, getting people on board, even before you go outside the building. So it's a lot more of that kind of blocking and tackling.
I even find that for myself, for the bigger companies we're working with, it's proportional to the amount of approvals I have to get, people I have to speak to. And I feel like the web design work hasn't even changed that much fundamentally. It's just, I got to talk to more people, get more clearance. And so would you say same thing for you and a lot of the marketing work that you do?
Oh, yeah. Larger companies for sure. It's like endless, right? Smaller companies, even though, it's still the same thing, right? So the CEO might have a vision, but again, everybody's moving so fast. There's usually 4 or 5 other people that have a vote and can derail what you're doing. And so the approval cycles have just gotten bigger, period. I can think back to a time when the CMO would have been my client. And if we got to that person, it was pretty much done, right? Maybe a CEO, if it were a bigger organization, would swoop in and say no, but typically that CMO was already keeping everybody well informed. And if we got the yes from them, that was it. You were moving, you were done. These days, it's a much more distributed decision-making process, which is why you hear about things like ABM marketing, and there's much more sort of A/B testing of concepts, because a lot of times it's not one person's vote. And a lot of times they can't necessarily agree on just one thing. And so that's where you let testing and sort of market feedback tell you what the right thing is.
Yeah. Can I ask you more about that? That's an interesting thought. So in terms of the amount of people that you have to go to get approval, let's say the same company 20 years ago versus, same headcount, let's say 20 years ago versus today. Do you think that you have to get approval from more people because marketing is almost, I don't want to say equally distributed, but the founders want to get more involved in the marketing maybe than they did 20 years ago. Would you say that the CMOs, trying to formulate what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Where exactly has it turned into this committee as opposed to
It was an intelligent question, but I'm trying to get it.
I knew where you were going. Yeah. I mean, I think I can think back 20 years ago, certainly 30, but it was just a much more hierarchical organization structures were more common. And so decision-making authority was pretty much vetted in those individuals, and that was it, right? I mean, maybe not exclusively, but much more so than today. Now, organizations want more input, want employees to feel connected to the mission of the marketing that's happening. The way to do that is to involve them. Plus, I think companies have realized good ideas can come from lots of places, and so again, gathering that feedback is just healthy. It makes it harder, right? It makes it harder. One of the ways you can make that process move more quickly, though, is really that upfront work we were talking about. Like if you're really locked in on your insights and you're really locked in on your positioning, your messaging, and your strategy, and that becomes then a litmus test for anything else you do. And so, the wild idea that might come out of somebody who has a vote can't really derail things if your strategy is set. That doesn't mean you ignore it. There's lots of avenues to take an interesting idea and sort of nurture it off the main line, but it can't just completely wag the dog, so to speak, because you know what you're trying to do. And that litmus test lets you look at those ideas and say, yes, but not here.
So how do you go about, for all these companies, knowing if brand positioning, strategy, things like that is working and it's not working?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a really advanced sort of research organization, take some of the bigger CPG firms, they're going to test that. They're going to test it ad nauseum. I'm sure if you work in that industry, you might say too much, but I mean, they try to de-risk those choices as much as humanly possible so that when they go out, they feel like they already know it works. If you're a startup, it's the complete other end of the spectrum. It's try it, see what people say, right? As long as it doesn't cause an ethical or professional or a legal issue, right? Absolutely. It's just absolutely try it. Just try it until you figure out what kind of feedback you get. In the middle somewhere, the market is going to tell you. I mean, that's where your A/B testing and what sort of responses you're getting. Your salespeople, frankly, can also tell you. They're not the only voice, but they're going to tell you based on talking to customers whether what the company now wants to say is going to be at odds with what they think their customers want. So that mid-level, you have far more informed inputs than you do at, say, a startup level, or then, if you're totally de-risking with research, but you have resources to figure out, do we think this is going to resonate? And then the market, because you're a bit more mature, you can very quickly read the tea leaves to figure out, did this work or not?
And do you find that there's a huge difference in strategy when it comes to testing? Well, I guess testing the strategy for a B2B company versus a B2C company.
Yeah, I suppose there is in that, B2C, they usually have more customers, period. So your time to data and results is shorter, right? You can get feedback really, really fast. And so you also just, get a lot. So, the sort of volume you would need to feel like you have a representative sample of feedback to make an informed decision. Usually it's faster. B2B, I mean, your sales cycles could be 18 months, right? So coming by that data takes longer, which again is you have to think strategically then about, do you have the discipline to stay the course on a particular strategy or not? Because more often than not, the company, whether consumer focused or customer focused, will get tired of the thing you're saying long before your intended audience even really knows about it.
That's probably one of the most important lessons I've learned in content. So I'm sure we could talk about that forever. And yeah, I do agree. I think B2B in most companies, it's just harder to gather the data because of how long the sales cycles take. For a lot of the Shopify stores we work with, it's more or less a simple A/B test. You change a word that you might use for one side of the positioning versus another. You see where the sales go. And there are other variables, but you can get a really good test in the same day almost. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting.
You can just make, on the one hand, that's great because now you're looking for feedback and you have it. Mm-hmm. The other problem can be you just analyze everything ad nauseum and never make any decisions. That's the other side of that coin. But the best part of it is you get the data quick and you can get a lot of data quickly. And so if you're paying attention, you have some discipline about pivoting and paying attention to that, you keep on testing. And that's a really important point. I mean, another thing that I've seen is, and this is maybe goes back to my early days in marketing, you used to be able to some degree set a marketing message out in the market and forget it. It was set it and forget it, much more than today, right? Today, anything you put out, you have to be paying attention immediately and all the time. And you have to be prepared to pivot, right? Because the market is so dynamic now and the information is so rich. It's just, there's nothing about marketing now that is set it and forget it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would imagine now the feedback cycles are so much shorter. When you're posting something, you can find out if it does well in the same day.
Yeah.
Where I'd imagine before, if you're going to do a radio ad, you probably have to wait a long time to get the numbers in and things like that. So
yeah, you'd have to wait a while. That's exactly right. So then you're building mechanisms in to try to tell if it's working, and those signals weren't super clear and weren't super regular or available. So yeah, it's another major thing that's changed about marketing. There's so much more data. There's so much more insight that you can gather from so many more sources now. And so it's become a very analytical business. It's still, I think, very, very creative. I also think it's still very grounded in foundational strategy, but you can be much more informed and much more iterative than you ever really could.
And from what I've observed, I feel like it's a lot, I don't want to say more difficult, but in a way it is a lot harder to create a good brand and positioning with all these different things getting thrown at you every day.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd agree with that or have a take on that.
I would. And that's the point of, like, if you paid attention to every data point, all you would ever do is pivot.
Yeah.
Right. And so
that's a good point.
You have to be able to separate the noise from that which is useful. And sometimes, I mean, even with a whole lot of data, even I think the CPG companies, because you've seen those, if they're as good at de-risking every product they launch, their products would never fail. And they do. And that's just indicative of how dynamic the market is, right? So sometimes, even when you have plenty of information, you just have to move, and you have to move based upon, a lot of times, the strategy and your belief in it. Quick digression. So I read Colin Powell's leadership book several years ago. He had a principle called the 40-70 rule. And of course, it was a completely different context. It was a battlefield sort of decision-making process. And his point was, you've got to gather enough battlefield data, right? Or even, strategic insight from whatever source to get to a position of 40 to 70% certitude that the choice you're going to make is going to work. And then you have to move. Waiting for anything beyond 70% means that you're going to come up with a point where you think you've got 100% certainty, only to find out on the battlefield things pivoted and you failed. And so he was talking about a bias for action. And I think that's what's necessary in this world of all these data points. You can't gather them to the point that you think you've de-risked this thing completely, because it's just too dynamic. It's not possible. So that 40-70 rule I always like. And you might say, well, how do I choose? Well, the strategy you laid out. At some point, when all the data gives you enough decision, but it's not so clear, and you got to move, you go back to your strategy and say, do we believe in it or not?
Goes back to the point of how much you need a strategist because of all the data that you have to analyze. And then it's kind of an interesting point as well, because if you're looking to get to 100%, you will never get there in terms of gathering all the data. But if you get to around half or 70%, you could probably get all that information and then make a good decision from there.
And because of the advances in MarTech and the advances in the way messages are distributed, right, and even managed in the reporting, I mean, you can pivot quickly. Right? You can make changes right away, whereas before you really couldn't.
And I wrote down another good question I want to ask you. And so when CEOs, it could be at the $5 million level up to the higher end of the spectrum, are looking to hire something in marketing, right? How do you kind of know, or when do you advise that they need a fractional CMO, a full-time CMO, part-time, or freelancer, or whatever the case may be? Like the structures, I guess, of that hiring.
Yeah, no, I mean, so obviously I compete with agencies. I compete with internal hires, right? You want to hire your own CMO. Those are pretty common, or freelancers. And so the way I always tell people is, listen, and I mean, I've managed agency infrastructures. I once managed Nokia's global agency infrastructure. And so I'm not down on agencies, but what I would say about agencies is they fill a particular need, right? And so if you have a defined outcome and you have something that can be procedurally managed, agencies are amazing because they're going to be better at that execution than you are. And so that's somebody that you take those projects to, right? Particularly too, if there's someone internally who understands your strategy, who can play litmus test and can guide that agency. One of the worst things I see happen is when CEOs or marketing departments hire an agency and outsource it. Outsourcing's not bad, but where they go, close the door and just hope they're doing the right thing. It's, again, not because agencies are bad, they're creative. they're perpetually creative. And so it is in their DNA to want to go off script. And so someone's got to be there for the brand to kind of point them. So I'm sorry, that's a bit of a digression too.
No, you're good. Yeah.
If you know what you want, agencies are great. If you know that you're ready for a CMO and you have the energy to invest in growing that person in your organization, coaching them, right? And you're not afraid of that investment and the tether of all the overhead that comes with that. And then what if they don't work out, which really means you have to be willing to coach them up.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Hire a full-time CMO, invest in that discipline in your building, grow them up. And who knows, they become one of your really important strategic leaders.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the time for the coaching and you need somebody that can hit the ground running more or less, that can handle that agency infrastructure for you, or you're just really not even sure, that's where you need someone like me. You're not going to be successful hiring a younger person that knows how to do, HubSpot and Google Ads and expect them to run your marketing department. Because again, you're choosing a tactic, not a strategy. And so I know a lot of the CEOs I worked with, well, we hired a marketing person. How'd that work for you? Well, it really didn't. And then I said, well, what happened? Well, they're still over here. What are they doing now? Social media. It's like, what a waste, right?
I could take that in so many different ways.
Anywhere you want to go.
Yeah. To ask you about that, do you see, I have my own inputs on this, but we'll get into it.
I love it. Let's go.
Do you see that there's a common trend now? Like a common thing I see is I have I want to start posting on social media, whatever the case may be. The CEO goes, I hire a social media manager, and they just do general posting across general platforms. And I think I see that across everything. I hired a marketing person, and they built my website, something like that. Do you see that generalists are a trend that is helpful for CEOs and stuff like that? Or do you think they should be looking at specialists and when to know who to hire who?
Great question. I think broadly speaking, generalists are going to become more important than ever. Because I think in the long run, AI is going to take over a lot of the very specific platform specific or sort of configuration jobs away from young people like me. When I started, that's the work you got. And you did whatever labor work, whatever punching into the keyboard no one wanted to do. That's going to change. I think that stuff's going to go away. And so what's going to be valuable though is critical thinking, professionalism, ethical thinking, creative thinking, relationship building, things that are born of a different educational system than the one that's been spent a lot of energy teaching us specific skills. I think a lot of those specific skills are going to move over to an agent that is better at repeating that specific process time again, and the humans won't be needed for that. So I do think a generalist is going to be more important, particularly on those softer skills that are more human skills. So I do think that's the arc of that. Who do you hire? Well, again, it kind of depends on where you are, right? If you're a younger organization and you don't have anything and you can't invest in a senior person or even a fractional, right? Getting somebody to get started on content is probably the smartest way to go. Because if you're building core content as sort of the hub of a wheel, and I think you know this yourself intuitively, I mean, that's part of the reason we're here. You're doing this for a reason, right? It's because that core piece of content can be used in so many ways, in so many cost-effective ways. And so someone like that is tactically very good at content and content dissemination, probably a reasonable person for your very young company, right? And the CEO in that case probably has to play the marketer for a while. More mature organizations, well, that's where, again, you get into this question, well, what do I want? Am I willing to invest in somebody to grow this discipline within my company who knows lots of things? Or do I really need someone that's a specialist in a certain area? It depends strategically on where your gaps are. So if you can't figure out where your gaps are, you need someone like me to come in to help you figure out your gaps. That doesn't mean you need to hire me. It may be that, what we figure out is you don't need me. You need an agency to do X, Y, or Z. And that's fine, right? But you have to find out where your gaps are in order to make that decision.
Yeah, 2 points. One, as an agency, I would definitely agree with that. I think, because we're focused on, say branding and web design and those sort of deliverables. So I think when a company comes to us, they say, hey, we know this is what we need. Just deliver this for us. Mm-hmm. That will knock that out of the park. But I think if it turns out that's actually not, they're hole in their bucket and they need something else, which we're not aware of, we can only perform an audit and tell you, look, we know this is not for you. It's a little bit hard if whatever, I'm just going to make up an example. The case is they actually need ads on a very random platform. That would be the biggest growth driver for them. So I do agree with that. I think knowing kind of what you need is probably the most important thing before approaching agency to knowing who to hire.
Yeah.
And I see that all the time. Someone will hire for a full-time role, which you could have had an agency, or even honestly probably could have had a freelancer do it.
Sure.
And it probably wasn't as big of a thing as you needed to. So
Yeah, and it really goes back again to that strategic thing about marketing. More
yeah,
often than not, what I find is, and this is before they end up coming to me, we need marketing, hire a person. And that's just not well thought out. That's a lottery. You're gonna get whatever you get, right? And so that doesn't work. Hire an agency. Well, that's fine. Who's going to manage that agency? Is that agency good at the thing that you need? Because, the integrated agency model that I grew up in, where everything was sort of in one building, and, in account service, you had to know your client's business sideways, backwards, and forwards, doesn't really exist anymore, right? The agencies have specializations now, and the conglomerates sort of own all of them. But the connective tissue that makes that work as one system, hard to come by.
can I, no pun intended, double click on that?
Yeah.
So the integrated agency model, the way I view that is like, I would imagine there's just so many things to know now. Like we were just talking about agency before not agency, SEO before we started. And how even that in and of itself, there's so many things that are changing every single day, where maybe 20, 30 years ago, there just wasn't as many things to observe. Would you say that the amount of marketing channels that work and people use, that now that that's available, it's harder to create that all-in-one business? Or what do you think the reason is for the all-in-one business or an all-in-one agency kind of going away and kind of becoming different, separate agencies?
That's a really good question. I mean, I lived at a time where it was all in one building, right? And then it all got split up and has really kind of been split up into separate entities now underneath, 3-4 holding companies and then a world of startups that are trying to sort of become the big thing. Yeah. But that integrated model was truly that. And now what keeps us from doing that? Is it media proliferation? Is it all the things that you can do, all the possibilities? I don't think it's that really. I think fundamentally the problem is that the margins are thin. And so it's really, really hard, right? And the information about what it costs to do a certain thing in the freelance community, it's so available. The tools that it takes to create stuff today, they're not perfect, but they're really easier to use than it used to be. So you used to go to that integrated agency because they knew how to make all the stuff and they had the strategy and the planning inside and they would understand your business. And so they just made it easier for you, but it's just gotten easier for you to do that stuff yourself. What's gotten hard is doing it well because you're not really resolute on who you are and what you have to say. So you start chasing the shiny thing again. And that usually leads you to needing someone to help you wrangle that into a cohesive proposition.
So I think we talked about this when we got coffee last time. So with AI making generalists more, it's easier to become a generalist more or less. And that's kind of having a trend. Do you think that the integrated agency model will come back and be kind of an important part in the marketplace?
It's a great question. I don't know. If you read what's happening in the market with the really big guys even gobbling each other up, right? It seems like what the market is telling us is that the only way that agency works well is two ways. You're really super, super huge, and the scale of what you can produce lets you sort of suffer the slings and arrows and the sways, the ebbs and flows of just clients coming and going because they absolutely do. Or margins being different for different services, but you have to be able to offer it. You don't want them to go to a competitor, which opens a door to potentially eroding your position, right? So the big companies seem to be the way that works, right? You're integrated in as much as within the family, we've got everything. On the smaller side, you can absolutely be everything because your overhead is different, right? But you got to hustle for clients and you really got to pay attention to your margins and sort of your blended rates. These kinds of things are really important. I think you can make a business that way. I really, really do. Can it operate at scale anymore? I don't know. I mean, again, the market, I think, is telling us it can't. Like that middle doesn't really seem to exist the way that it used to. You're either small or you're part of, or becoming part of some massive thing because that's the only way that model seems to work.
I am interested in your thoughts on the advice you give to people looking to start an agency or become, eventually a fractional CMO or even a CMO in general. Would you find that the advice you gave when you were first starting your career versus now is a lot different? And just what is the general advice you'd give to people looking to get into marketing?
To get into marketing or if they want to be in the agency business?
Well, say in the agency space, like they're looking to start their own agency or be a freelancer or just sell marketing services more or less.
Yeah. So I a couple things come to mind. One of which is it's never been better to be a business owner than I think it is right now.
Yeah.
What it takes to set up and operate a business, it's just gotten so much easier. There's so many tools from, from pay management companies that handle your payroll to, infrastructure of, what you need to operate the business itself. That stuff is so available in a way it never was before. So it's super, super easy, which is one of the reasons why what's happening with agencies. Well, anybody can be one, right? And with the tools that are out, anybody can produce stuff, right? And so the startup barriers are really, really low, and that's really fantastic. But if you want to be in that business, it's a challenging business, because I think this would resonate with you. And as a fractional, I can say it resonates with me. You are always developing business. It is biz dev always. That is never off. And so a lot of people that start agencies, I don't think they appreciate that. They see an agency they worked at, they see it operating, they see the work that happens, they feel like they can do that work, and so they want to start one. But it is hard work to network and build a base of clients. And then, by the way, actually deliver in a way that retains them. That's not something you outsource to AI. And that's not something you, at least not right now, right? So I usually talk to people about it and be, hey, think through, how do you want to go about your career? Because there is no getting around the hustle that's required to earn business, and then the hustle that's required to deliver against it. So I usually start there. If they're all in on that, then my conversation is about, okay, pay really close attention to your pricing and to your margins, because it's very quick to earn your way right out of business, right? And then I'll say things like, have a point of view, because what's going to make you different is probably how you treat your clients, your relationship with them. I know we talked about your business, and we talked about a lot of ways your business is you. People like you, and the way you pay attention to them, and the way that you listen, and then the way you deliver. One of the ways I think you'll grow is codifying that as the standard for your agency. And anyone else that comes in, they have to deliver as if they were you.
I agree. And to the advice part, but thank you for the comments, by the way.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, to the advice part, you kind of crystallize what I would have given it as advice to even younger me starting this is, the first question is almost as a prerequisite: are you really good at what you do? Or can you get to that point? That's just like to be able to compete in the game. The other question is how you're going to get business, because even when I'm talking with other designers to hire on projects and things, I find that there's so much talent out there. But how you're going to really do business development. And I think getting into this agency, I didn't realize that is probably 90% of the job is business development. And, yeah.
And that's the part, because everybody sees the glamour part,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you're a creative person, what you're going to say is, the piece of creative I made was so amazing. Doesn't everybody want it? And the reality is there's so much creative, and it is so subjective that it's really difficult to make a business on your unique creative ability. Right? It's so subjective.
Yeah, that's what surprised me so much is what's amazing design for one founder, after we get their input, is not the same. There's really, when I started this, I wanted everything to be modern. Every design style would be pretty much more or less the same to what we liked. Yeah. And I realized, part of being like what we call a modern agency is not just what we think is cool. It's also what works, what's tested, that sort of stuff. And that's what has amazed me, is how subjective the creative can be.
It's incredibly subjective, and everybody starts the way you do. Every business does, and I think this is part of that engineering thing I was talking about, right? People that create things, they typically create them because they like them, or they see a discontinuity and they want to fill it. And they certainly have a point of view that is valuable. But the market is the ultimate arbiter of what is actually good or not. Yeah. And so, if you really like the way you do it, and you really want to stick to the way you do it, that's great. And if you're lucky, the authenticity of that eventually resonates with the broader market, and you can take off. I mean, we all know brands that kind of stick to certain things and they do really well doing it, right? It's rare, right? More often than not, the way to make a business is to give a market what it wants. If you want to educate the market that what they want is what you have, it's doable, but it'll take time for sure, right? And it's going to take money.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about websites real quick, because I know that's obviously a good topic for us.
Yeah, topic, sure.
And so with all the engagements that you've done in different companies you worked with, what have you seen as like a successful website creation? What is good web design to you, and your inputs and what you worked with and what you've seen?
Yeah, great question. As it pertains to design for websites, I tend to be utility focused. Yeah. So I love artistic designs. I think it's fascinating. I think it's amazing. I love seeing them, reviewing them, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't work for the business, it's just neat.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that, but
Yeah.
there's a practical reality of
Yeah.
it's about the business, right?
Mhm.
So if it doesn't move the business needle, so good site design to me has to do with utility. So again, understanding what role the website plays in the customer's journey is job one, right? And then using it to deliver what that customer needs when they're at that moment. That is the arbiter of whether it's good or not. And its success is, does it move that person down the journey that they need to resolve their buying behavior, right? And that you need in order to be a going concern, right? So utility, I'm a form follows function guy that way. And so that's typically how I will judge it. And so I'll judge a website on, does it meet that audience where they are to give them what they need to move them to the place you want them to go and they frankly want to go. Or if they're not ready, you move them out because they're not really a prospect for you anyhow.
Yeah, I think utility is a good word to use because when you're looking at, I've seen tons of other agency websites where you have no idea where any of the buttons are because their website is so modern, so new, but it's just words all over the place, tons of videos, but it's going to distract from the main goal is how do you get you're trying to get creative clients or whatever. And so I think looking at it as, okay, you have a website, what's the utility? To get leads. Well, if you make amazing designs, what designs are actually going to move people closer to the goal? And I think thinking through that lens is kind of what we do. Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to judge from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I guarantee that the ones with the bad navigational
Yeah.
sort of scheme.
And you've definitely seen them
Oh
before.
man,
Yeah.
everybody's
Yeah.
seen them. And some of them are amazingly visually compelling,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
With zero utility, right? So
Yeah.
somebody in the building at that company loved that and
Yeah.
really thought that represented them. And again, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But if no one can get it,
Yep.
you're talking to yourself.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I the first version of our website that we made, it was like a crazy video when you first got there. I think I put the navigation at the bottom. This like 2 years ago. And I was basically just made it so confusing to where if you were not a web designer yourself, or maybe even if you are, you just couldn't use the website. And so I once realized, I said, wow, I don't think anyone's gonna be able to fill out a lead form on here. So we should probably change that. And I think, and I think that's kind of an important lesson, even for all the aspects of marketing, is like, what is the importance of what we're doing here and thinking through that lens,
Yeah.
not as what do I think is cool, what could be a cool ad for a billboard or whatever the case may be.
It goes all the way back to the idea of what used to work, where you could design the narrative and tell everybody what to think and what was cool.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
The audience decides. And so one of the biggest mistakes I see with sites, and a lot of my engineering friends do this. Frankly, a lot of anybody that's created a thing does this. It's a lot of pride of authorship. And so when those people want to talk about their service or their product, they want to tell you everything about it, right?
Yeah.
It's just like talking to somebody who just had a baby. They would tell you everything about the baby, right? And for the most part, unless it's like your sister, you don't care.
Yeah.
Right. There's a limit to how much you care about that. But that pride of authorship from the people that make these products. And so their websites reflect everything they have to say, every product feature that the thing can do. And reality is your audience probably cares about 1 to 3. And the rest, you're just cluttering their mind.
Yeah, I always say, I don't know the exact quote from Steve Jobs. I'm not going to even try it, but you know how his process was always, what can we remove from it to make it simpler? Yeah, exactly. And so I think for a website, if you can describe everything in a landing page or even a few sections, that is so much better than having a 20-page website with all this stuff. And what's interesting, and I didn't realize this going into it, most of the web projects we do are, hey, we have tons of information. We don't even really care that the design is not that good. But can you simplify this? Can we bring all this to one page? Because no one knows where to find anything.
It's so there's an old school tech video from back in the day when Apple came out. I think it was the iPod, and it was about designing the packaging for the iPod at the time. And it's classic Apple at the era, just completely white with a visual, a couple of words, very, very simple packaging. And what would happen if this came from Microsoft? And so that the video goes through just starting with something simple and how they just completely clutter it with features and functions and sets. And, it's a bit of a joke on Microsoft, and they culturally are different companies, but that's what happens when you have a lot of pride of authorship. And if the people running the specs or running the marketing is, you want to say everything. And I saw this when I was at Nokia competing with Apple. And we tried to talk to the leaders of Nokia about how they were really honing in on the 3 things all of our research said people care about. And they were going to make it simple and do that better than anything else. And it's going to be a problem for us. And the engineers that I talked to couldn't understand it. they said, look at all the superiority of the device we have. It'll do these 10,000 things that thing won't do. And I said, yes, but people will not buy or ever use those 10,000. They want 3. That's what they're making. And they crushed us.
And would you, this is something that I say a lot. I don't know if you agree. I always feel that there's a lot of skill in what you can remove and make it simpler. I think it's, on the other side, it's very easy to add tons of, say you're describing your company, tons of adjectives on what you are. You're fast, you're this, you're that. But I think it's the harder part is how can you narrow it down to 3? And so I think that's kind of where the skill comes in. I don't know if you would agree with that.
100%. I think it's really, really hard. I mean, sit in a room with a CEO and tell them, ask them the 3 most important things about their product. They'll talk to you for 20 minutes, right? And I mean that, again, there's nothing wrong with that. You love your thing.
Exactly.
You've sweat, blood, tears to make a thing. And I get it, but the audience doesn't care. And so it gets to be really, really tough. But that's where the audience is the ultimate arbiter of the thing you're proud about and the thing you're proud about that they care about. That's that messy work that is difficult. And it just takes time to get a leadership team, first of all, to agree what are the 3 things that we actually think matter. Ideally, 1 really core idea. And then the discipline to execute that really, really well over time and not get bored with it. That takes some discipline. That's where guys like Jobs were brilliant. I mean, he could drive that kind of focus.
And what are some other major things that we might not have touched on in terms of branding, positioning? It could be design, websites, anything that you think a CEO that you're constantly having conversations about and that they should know.
That should know?
Yeah, that they should implement or they should do.
Yeah, I mean, really good question. There is so much that you could do if you're that person. And you're thinking about from like new and emerging technologies and tactics primarily.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is be careful of anybody that's telling you the world has changed and you got to jump on this thing right now or you're dead. Right now, so one of the topics that I was talking with Tom Dennell, who's my colleague at the Communion Collective, I know you've met with him recently, from an SEO perspective, and it's like, well, everybody's saying that AEO and GEO, and so what the LLMs are doing to search is completely changed. You got to change everything. And that's when I went to talk to Tom, and he's like, no. Yes, there are changes. And yes, we can see things in the data that show us how people are using these engines. But his point to me was overall search is up vastly. So the addition of this new tool and this new capability has taken like a lot of surface questions out of, say, Google's general sort of search use and put it into the engines, or really complex questions people want answers to. The AI engines are better at giving you the depth to get to those answers, but the behavior is still the same. And in fact, it's increased. And he's talked about Google search being the organic traffic that comes to you from Google. What you're getting is higher quality traffic through that mechanism than you are maybe through an AEO GEO engine where someone's asking generic questions. So the people that tell you the new shiny thing is the thing, be cautious about that, right? Dig a little deeper because you could chase a lot of snake oil salesmen.
Yeah, when someone asks me what's your biggest competitor, I always say misinformation, and so and I coined that myself actually.
Nice work.
But along those lines, when it comes to, let's say, AI, I'm sure it comes up a ton in your conversations. What are some good bits of advice where you tell CEOs this is some areas you should really be looking into? This is where people talk about AI, but it's not really a use case for you yet, or just some basic notes on that for you.
So my perspective on AI is it's not the death knell everybody wants to say it is. I think the humans are going to just be more human, and the AI is going to be more calculative. The stuff that's processed in math, it's going to just take that stuff, and we're going to be freed up to be better at what we're better at, right? So I think fundamentally that's where it's going. I think every AI solution needs to have a human in the loop, right? You can't just outsource things to AI and think it's going to work. It's not ready for that. We're a ways away from that. Right. And so what I tell people about AI is don't chase a short-term fix. Right. I think a lot of the stuff that's going on, what I'll call point solutions, like I want a chatbot to do an X, that's not really going to help you. Again, it's a bit like we were talking about earlier with campaigns. Like I need ads. Oh, okay.
The chatbot I hear every single
I'll
day.
bet you get chatbot. It's like probably the first thing you hear.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But the fundamental question is why? And what do you want this to do? I think the smart companies with regards to AI are looking at how do I use AI to actually transform my business, not to solve some little point problem. Like put AI into the workflows at the center of your business and liberate your business to operate more efficiently because you're transforming the way you're operating. You're not putting it on the edge. That having been said, what I always tell people is absolutely start doing something. right? Start experimenting, start getting up to speed. Because if you're just waiting, your competitor is going to lap you. So I know that sounds contradictory. I am saying get started, start tinkering, start exploring. It doesn't mean you need to productize everything you tinker with, but absolutely begin.
Yeah, and I even find for AI, people say, "Oh, AI is that going to take away your web design business?" And I always say it's actually helping us because we're able to be a way smaller team, develop sites for way bigger companies with less resources. And it's making us more of a strategy company, kind of in the same way for everyone else.
You bet.
It's taking away the mundane tasks, but it also allows us to say, okay, well, we have the data, we have the expertise, we understand the strategy more or less.
Yeah.
And it seems like from this conversation in particular that the importance on expertise and strategy, that is really like the most important thing. It's, more than it's ever been maybe.
I think so because like I used to tell clients, like building the marketing plan to execute the marketing, relatively speaking, that's the easy part. It's well defined. There's lots of ways to do it, right? The systems exist, like the exchanges exist to buy the ads. I mean, that stuff. The execution portion is really, relatively speaking, easy to implement. Figuring out who you are, what your customer cares about, getting alignment on what to say and how to say it, that's much harder, but it's also the critical differentiator because the democratization of the tools and the access to the information and the data means that everybody's got, not always, but you can get a lot of stuff to make smart decisions now that you couldn't get before. So the difference is going to be in your uniqueness and a lot of the how you do what you do and why you do it, as opposed to you pushed it out.
I 100% agree. And I also feel like from when we started this business, we actually did a lot of like paid ads and things like that. And I always found that if we knew for a fact that, let's say meta advertising would work for this client, okay, it's easy to figure out how to make it work if we knew that was the right strategy.
Sure.
The hard part is how do you find the right strategy?
Right.
And I think even for anything in marketing, if you kind of know what to prioritize, the second part is the easier part.
Yeah, I think the execution part is the easier part. Now, I don't mean I personally think the execution part. I'm not versed in the tools the way I used to be when I was younger. And so I usually get a HubSpot Pro or a Google Ads Pro or a Website Pro. And I let you guys do the thing you do better than I can do it, right? But it's well defined how to do this stuff now.
Yeah.
And so if you know exactly what you're trying to do, getting it done has gotten easier than it's ever been.
And so I think we did a pretty good job at talking about like marketing in the past, marketing in the current. And the last thing I want to talk about is where do you see marketing going in the future? It could be 2, 3, 5 years from now, or maybe even 10 or so. Where do you see it going?
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be much more precise than it's ever been. I think we're going to be really, really accurate, reaching the right person with the right message at the right time. I think that's all going to get a lot better. I mean, it's already incredibly better than the period we started talking about, right? But I think precision and personalization, those things are going to get better and better and better. I think our understanding of the customer, when to reach them and what it takes to convert them is going to get better. But I fundamentally think that, again, going back to AI, I'm actually looking forward to this. The example you gave, I think, is great because AI is taking a lot of the procedural sort of blocking and tackling stuff out of your hands, and you're spending more energy trying to work with your clients on what do you need? Why do you need it? Or why do you like this? And thinking through those choices. And then, I think we're going to get to the place, and this is greatly oversimplifying a lot of change that's going to take place, but where it's an easy button, right? I want my campaign against these people with these specific data inputs, and you're going to press go, and your AI agent will act as your marketing person that does that executional element. Because the executional piece being so well defined, so much data, the tools are going to harmonize probably through AI. I think that piece is going to be press the easy button and let it do that. And the humans are going to be the critical thinkers over, wait a minute, why did that happen? What do we think about that? And how does that reflect the things? Is that what we wanted? You're going to get much more of that human side doing the human stuff from a marketing perspective. But I think it's moving towards us as strategists and thinkers in a way that it hasn't in a really long time.
I completely agree. A common example I give, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, is let's say in content creation in general, what we're doing here, maybe, many years ago, it would take a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of time to go film something and go publish it. Now, AI, you can edit things with AI, you can create videos with AI. However, there's only certain creators that are at the top of the food chain because they're putting more effort into it. They have better strategy, better packaging, and maybe they're using AI tools to accelerate that process too. But it still goes back to skill at the end of the day, who's making the best stuff, despite AI being able to do everything in content. And so I think to the same degree of everything in marketing. It'll get easier, but I think it'll also get harder on a strategy perspective and knowing what's the best.
Right. It's very easy to just invest in a lot of AI rabbit holes, right? Burn a lot of time and energy because you think it's the panacea for your problems, but you're not doing the hard part, which is the upfront thinking. And ultimately that stuff will sort of level out, and the playing field on that stuff will level out, and then it won't be differentiating at all either. So again, I think getting started with all that, understanding it, yeah, you have to, but you need to have a strategy for what you're doing. Otherwise, you're just going to perpetually chase that shiny thing, and it will confuse you.
Awesome. And so where could people find you to help you out? And yeah, just contact you whenever they need you.
Yeah, LinkedIn, I'm easy to find there. Obviously, I'm a member of the Chameleon Collective, which is the fractional firm that I belong to. So you can find me on their website. And I have my own. I have a site called Spring Loaded Strategies where I try to produce thought leadership like this, things that I deal with clients that maybe if someone sees that, it inspires them to tackle a problem in their business. So springloadedstrategies.com is another.
This has been awesome. I'm super excited.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll reach there.